I'm Logan Crawford, and right now on Spotlight, we are talking to a man who has led an incredible life fighting injustice, fighting poverty, and fighting hunger. That journey has taken him from the United States to El Salvador and back again. His name is Robert Cook. He is a reverend, and he has written a book where he documents his journey. It is called Miracles in El Salvador, A Minister's Journey for Justice and Hope. Reverend Cook, thank you so much for joining us here today on Spotlight.
You are welcome. And I want to say thank you again to you for doing this interview. And also thank you to Tracy Noble, who has walked me through all of this to prepare, and to Parchment Global Publishers. Thank you to all of you.
They do a great job, and I'm glad they helped you get here today to talk to me. So thanks so much. Tell me a little bit about your story. It begins, I guess, in 1989. You're working for a church in Des Moines, Iowa. You're looking to combat hunger, and eventually your work will take you to El Salvador, right?
That is correct. I was working as an inner city minister. I was doing prison issues, hunger issues, homeless issues, and I was the hunger action enabler. And I was designated to write promotional materials for a hunger program. Part of that, the offering was going to go to El Tablon in El Salvador. Mm-hmm. And I didn't know anything about El Salvador. I needed to understand poverty in a third world setting. And so I elected, using the will of God will never take me any place, that his grace will not save me. So I made the trip to El Salvador for the purpose of learning about poverty, so I could write promotional materials.
Amazing. Also, in 1989, it was a different world. I mean, nowadays we go to El Salvador, at least we'd be connected perhaps by a cell phone or something like that. When you're going to El Salvador, there's no Google, there's no cell phone, there's no email. You're kind of on your own, right?
That's right. There was nothing like that. And Logan, it was the first time I ever traveled outside of the United States.
Wow. Did you speak Spanish?
I did not.
So you had quite a few challenges to overcome.
Pardon?
You had quite a few challenges to overcome.
Yes. Yes.
So you get to El Salvador. Tell me what that's like.
Well, I arrived in El Salvador, and the first thing I saw out of the airplane window was a tank pulling up to the airplane, and about a dozen soldiers with M16s surrounding the plane. And so that was the first thing I saw. And when I finally got through customs, which, by the way, and they only gave me 12 days, and I was there for 28 in my visa, which is another story. I found my transporter, Tony, in a red pickup, and he talked a mile a minute about violence in El Salvador and the commemoration of the 6 Jesuit professors at the University of Central America who were murdered a year earlier. This was the first anniversary coming up on the 16th of November that year. And he finally inquired, "Are you here to go to the commemoration?" And I said to him, "Oh, I'm sure I will go, but I'm here to learn about poverty in El Tablon." And his eyes got about that big, and he said, "Why?" And I explained, and he said, "You will never," this is important, "you will never learn about poverty in this country until you know about the violence that has been committed by the military and the government against its people." He was right. He was right.
So right off the bat, you're basically given the secret keys to the city. That's the problem. It's the government, it's the military, it's the oppression, right?
And so for about 10 days before I went to El Tablon, he showed me, along with other people, the places of martyrdom where Monsignor Romero was murdered while saying Mass on March 24th, 1980, where the 6 Jesuit priests that we were going to commemorate and the 2 women, the housekeeper and her daughter, were murdered, and the 4 American women, 3 nuns and a social worker, who were kidnapped leaving the airport and taken into the killing fields and murdered. I heard all of that. I saw all of that. And I also learned about the 1,000 massacres that were committed against the people. It was just a heart-rending experience to learn all of that.
I'm sure. Now, where were you staying? Were you staying at a church or a rectory down there?
I stayed in a school that was set up for the people who came for the commemoration of the 6 Jesuits who were killed and the 2 women. I was there by myself the first night, and then I joined. Tony took me with him to pick up the delegation at the airport the next day.
Gotcha. So you go to this commemoration of the Jesuits who were killed, and I'd imagine that's a very solemn, very nerve-wracking event for you to attend, because you realize that the clergy are not necessarily treated well in El Salvador.
If I understood your comment correctly, actually the march for the commemoration was not a solemn event. It was lighted up by kerosene doused torches, people screaming their hearts out about the deaths that had taken place. And we went to the university from downtown, about 5 kilometer walk, and had a mass in commemoration of the martyrs at that time.
Gotcha. And now, at what point do you actually go to El Talón and begin working with the poor and indigent there?
It was 10 days after I arrived, and I saw the poverty as we drove through the city. I saw women at stoplights holding their child, begging for money for food. I saw children begging for money at stoplights. I saw children sneak into outdoor restaurants and snatch food that was left on the plates. Hunger was obvious. I learned something about poverty in those heart-rending moments. But it was 10 days later that about 2:30 in the morning, we loaded into a pickup and drove the 3 hours to El Tablón from San Salvador. And so began my 16 days in the company, in the hospitality of some very wonderful people who took care of me. In fact, if I may say, they met before I arrived and decided that should the military discover me in their midst, they would surround me, and the military would have to take all of them before they got to me.
They were willing to risk their own lives to protect you.
They were willing, and they took good care of me. I had 3 meals a day of eggs, beans, and tortillas. I was ready for different food by the time that 16 days was over.
Right. Tell me about how you were able to build that bond with the people. Was it the fact that you were a man of God that they related to you? Was it something else? Tell me.
They related to me as a friend at first. Religion was not part of it. Now, I would say that later in my life in El Salvador, I was known as Hermano Roberto. In respect for my ordination as a Presbyterian pastor, and so I was actually embraced by the Catholic Church that was there. But in El Tablón, they saw me as a friend, somebody who came to visit them to see what their life was really like, and they appreciated me very much.
I'm sure. Now, these days that you spent in El Talón, 16 days, they have really shaped your life, right?
It was what?
They really had an impact on you. They shaped your life.
Oh, yes, they did. Number one, the care that they gave to me. Number two, I need to say the night before I left, they had a party for me. Now, the party was a bonfire, a huge bonfire with a big pot of coffee with sweetbread for everyone. And people came from all around, not just from El Tablon, but from the other cantons, they call them, that were in the neighborhood. They loved me. They truly did. They appreciated I came. And I want to say, the morning that I left, there were 4 women gathered from the community to walk me down the mountain to meet the bus that would take me to San Salvador. I said to them, out of the spirit of the moment, I will come back. I will see you again. I didn't know how that would happen, but the love they had showed me, the appreciation that they gave me, and the terrible violence that they existed in, I knew I had to go back. The will of God would not take me any place that his grace did not protect me. And I believe that. I still believe that.
Amazing, amazing. And you wore that as a cloak. The love of God looking over you felt as protection to you as you worked there in El Salvador. When did you eventually go back?
I went back the next year. I was in Guatemala studying Spanish because I knew Spanish was in my future, and was with a friend, Don was his name, and he said, I want to go see El Tablon that you talk so much about. And so we did. We flew that hop from Guatemala to El Tablon, to El Salvador, got a translator and a driver, and they took us to El Tablon. And Logan, when I entered the community, they saw me, and I heard my name yelled, and people came, and they were so grateful that I did what I said I would do, that I came back. And that's what one woman approached me. She was on the directiva, like the council. And she said, you're a man of your word. The translator was there, of course. I didn't understand what they were saying, but at that time, but she said, you're a man of your word. We thank you.
Amazing, amazing.
And there was a war going on. Pardon? There was a war going on in El Salvador at the time, the Civil War. It was the 11th year of a 12-year-long civil war. And when we got there, they said, when we tell you to leave, you leave, because there's an advancement of the military coming, and they're going to come here. And so they did. They said, you got to go. We were there about an hour. And so we ran down the valley where we had left the pickup. And when we got to the other side of the valley where we had stayed for the night, the woman said, get out of here. The military knows that you was at that stronghold. It was a FMLN stronghold for the military, the revolutionaries. And so we did. We got in the Jeep, collected our stuff, and driving down the road, there the military was. And they stopped us. They took our passports. They put 4 or 5 teenagers with M16s on us and disappeared. Now remember, we're talking about a country that they killed a Monsignor while saying mass. And the translator, after about a half hour, she started crying. She said, they're going to kill us. If they would kill the 6 Jesuit professors and 2 women and the Monsignor and 4 American women, we're small peanuts. I happen to have, because of a friend, a letter with a Senator Tom Harkins on his letterhead that said he knew me, which he did. I grew up in the town where he went to high school, and I dug that out, and I said, please have them take this to him. And 5 minutes later, the sergeant or whoever he was came out of the bush, gave us their passports, and he said, I can't tell you what he said, but essentially he said, get out of here and don't ever come back.
Right.
Next time you might not be so lucky.
Amazing. Amazing. Fortunately, you had that letter.
Pardon? Oh,
I said,
yeah.
fortunately, you had that letter.
It was because of a friend who was worried about me going to El Salvador that he got it, because he knew Tom well.
And joining us right now on Spotlight is Doug Maben, who actually challenged the Reverend to write this book. Doug, it was some kind of better challenge. Tell me about that a little bit.
So, some kind of what?
Some kind of challenge. You challenged the Reverend to write this book?
Well, Bob is just an extraordinary human being. And over the years, we were colleagues in ministry. And over the years, during that time, our other members of the clergy always talked about what Jesus said, talked about what Jesus did. And it soon became clear to me that Reverend Cook did what Jesus said and did what Jesus did. And especially in this journey down to El Salvador, taking it on faith that that is what the Holy was calling him to do. And then having him send me parts of his journal, I just thought, somebody's got to hear about this. People have to hear this story about modern discipleship and accepting a faith journey and taking the risk of being faithful in a dangerous situation.
Absolutely, absolutely. So you were actually reading portions of his journal?
Well, that's how it started. First, it started with a conversation between us in which Bob would tell me what he's been up to lately and where he went going down to El Salvador and what his experiences were. And so I heard that story over the years. We had been apart, in the country for a while. It hadn't really communicated much, but got back in touch as he began to tell me this story about the things he'd been doing. And I think I recall saying to him, "You are journaling this, aren't you?" And he said, "Yeah, he is." And then I think that's when the idea occurred to me that, we've got to let other people in on this story. We've got to let other people know about this modern walk with Jesus that he's doing in the midst of El Salvador and its poor.
Absolutely. And Reverend, tell me a little bit about Doug's reaction and how that influenced you.
I'm sorry, what was that?
I was saying, tell me a little bit about Doug's reaction to your writings and your journal and how that influenced you.
Bob's getting a little hard of hearing.
No, I just want to make sure my mic is on. It is. I was saying Doug was actually able to influence you, challenge you to actually write the book.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
In fact, it was because he said he would be my editor if I would write the book. And then he followed up by contacting me and saying, "You got anything to give me yet?" Doug takes my writing, which is true, and puts it to paper like it's music. It sings. With me, it's just narrative.
So you guys essentially wrote the book together.
Oh, yeah, very much so. It was a collaborative effort. Bob has many gifts as a minister that he's demonstrated over the years. One thing that God did not give Bob is a command of the written English language. so unfortunately, I'm an English major, or was an English major in college. And so it worked out well. He would send me, he had this written journal, he typed out the journal, and then he would send it to me. And I would be up in this little study in my home, reading this and rereading it. And till one evening I came downstairs to talk to my spouse, Jackie, and I said, "I think I need to get my glasses checked. I'm just not seeing very well." And she said, "Well, that's probably a good idea. While you're at it, why don't they have them check out your head for taking on your friend's book?"
That's funny. Right? That's funny.
Anyway,
so how long did this take to write the book?
Well, actually, it's a second book. This one is a much better book. The first one took 6 years. I don't know. It's called When the Sun Comes Up in the West. Some of the same material, but this one took about a year.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, the first book took a long time to get into a written form, and we had a number of people that actually helped us do that, from Bob's congregation back in Iowa when he was serving, I think, Highland Park. Is that right, Bob? Is that where you were or had been? Anyway, we had a written transcript of all of his journal, and I had figured out how to cut it up into chapters and put pieces of it together so that we had a form to follow, and then had a couple of sets of eyes read through the book for us to try to get it as clean as we possibly could before submitting it to the publisher. So it was actually a whole cast of characters involved in getting the book actually published.
What parts of the book struck you most, Doug, once you put it together? Like, you're like, wow, this is the most powerful aspect of it.
There are so many different incidences in which, when Bob going down to El Salvador, there's a story in there about he and a colleague, another minister, had come to visit. They took a Spanish class together, just ventured off into El Salvador from Guatemala, ended up face to face with military and their lives at risk. And, that was just a powerful incident in which, the hand of the holy reached in and kind of pulled them through that safely. And there's so many of those incidents that happened during the course of this whole journey on Bob's part that are just so heart-wrenching. Mm-hmm. His dealings with the poor and how much they struggled, as well as how much generosity they showed him, a minister from the first world coming into their third world environment, and letting their hearts pour out to him, their generosity out of the mere nothing that they had. It just story after story about different individuals who affected his life, who directed him into new areas to help and serve. There's a story about Milagro and how much she helped him to become acclimated to that culture and not seem like a generous white man coming down and just doing handouts, and all those things that are just cultural things that you have to overcome. And each step of the way, some angel comes along and helps Bob through another situation that is just remarkable when you read the whole story. And the other.
I'm sorry.
Sure. No, go ahead, Reverend.
May I appreciate what Doug is saying very much. There's a story about a massacre that I would like to interject if I could.
Good.
Sure.
Good.
It's the massacre of El Mazote. There were 1,000 massacres during the war in El Salvador. It was what they called taking the water away from the fish, because the military and the government thought that if they could just get rid of those people like I love so much in the countryside, they wouldn't have the support. The FMLN would not have the support of the people. They're just a bunch of drug runners anyway, they said. Well, the one massacre that is most on my mind is El Mazote. I don't know. I could not find this relic. I don't know if it will show. See that little bone in the palm of my hand?
I do.
That's the part of massacres that was never talked about. I was in El Mazote. This was, the massacre happened in 81, so this would have been in the early 90s. And there were 2 little girls that happened on to me. And they, of course, as always, children would say, "Dorme un colon," which was like a quarter in their currency at the time. And then they took me by the hand and took me to the monument of 227 children that were put into the house of the priest closed the doors, and shot through the doors and the windows to kill those children. And then they burned it. Then they burned that. And then the girls wanted to make sure I saw that monument. Then they took me by the hand and took me down this road, the home still with the bullet holes around the corner. And that was where they took young women to kill them. And they began to dig in the excavation that had been done to find the bodies of all the people that had been killed. And finally they exclaimed, and they brought me that bone. The minds of little girls that wanted me to know that it's not just the adults that were killed or their children in the house, but unborn babies, unborn, were murdered in that massacre.
Amazing.
I can almost cry now thinking about what they did.
Yeah.
They were so aware of death, the violence in their country, and they wanted me to know that part.
When you were there, you absolutely saw the worst of life and you saw the best of life, it seems.
That's beautiful. That's beautiful.
And I don't know if you want me to bring up one other topic.
Absolutely.
In the violence that happened, it was an accident, but I ran into, a woman ran right in front of my car on February 14th, 2007, and I killed her. The police were called, of course, and when they arrived, they asked for my keys, and then they said, "You're under arrest. The woman you hit is dead." And I said, but it's not my fault. And they said, "It's the law. You're under arrest, and you will go to jail for 72 hours. After you talk with the family about how much you're going to pay them for the death of their loved one." It wasn't my fault. She ran right in front of me. And so they took me to the hospital where she had been taken. The family was there. We negotiated $5,000 that I would pay for the death of that woman. I felt so bad about what happened. But in the process, the coroner came and the chief of police came, and everything was determined, yes, it happened. And then it came time for me to go to jail. The policeman opened the door of the car where I had been under arrest the whole time and said, "Go home." He said, "You have proven that you are remorseful. You were kind to the family. I will defend this in court." And so he let me go home. I was so grateful. And so in court, 2 weeks later, when the judge asked the family, "Are you satisfied?" They said, "Oh, yes, he was very good to us." And so, again, the will of God interjected a word here. I said to the judge, "I'm aware that there are 2 orphans." And they started asking me $10,000 so they could build a home for those orphans. A little girl, 6 years old, a little boy, 4 years old. And I said, "Judge, we're going to build a house for those little girls, those children, because they live in an adobe hut with no water and no electricity." And we built a home. Yeah. The church helped me raise that money. We raised the money and built that home for those little. I was there two months ago, and the woman, I can't remember her name offhand. She was 6 years old at the time. She's now 26. She has a girl 6 years old. When she saw me come into the yard, she screamed my name and ran to me and hugged me, and then began to tell that little girl that was hers, 6 years old, that I was the one that built the house they live in.
Wow.
It took a lot of people to do that.
Yeah.
It's an amazing story.
That's the story.
You really do find the best in people, Reverend. I mean, even the police officer in a country that's notorious for corrupt police officers, you find the one who you're actually able to touch his heart and he sets you free. It really does seem like a miracle.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Among so many. Yeah.
Doug, it must have been really nice for you, one, to build upon your friendship with the Reverend as you're writing this, two, listen to his stories and learn from them, and then put them down in writing.
I'm much happier with the book we have now than the first book we did. Mm-hmm. The first book was I mean, it was wonderful too, but it told the story, I think, from a kind of different point of view. So it was focused mostly on the justice issue, mm-hmm. and the injustices and Bob's reason for taking this step of faith. And that was good. This book, I think, turned a corner for us in terms of the miracles that mm-hmm. came about. We focused more on rewriting those old stories, focusing on the miracle of it, and then the additional information about starting the solar project for electrification in the cantons where people don't have electricity. It's more a hopeful approach to the same story with new information. I think that made it, and we had we had great help in writing this book. An old friend of ours invited us to come to Omaha, Dr. John Else, who's been a university professor in both Nebraska and Iowa. And first, Bob and I were going to meet together halfway. The first time we wrote the book, we met together in a bed and breakfast in, I can't remember, someplace in the middle of Nebraska, and just spent the weekend pounding out these stories and refining it and getting the book into form so we could try to get it, further up the pipe. And this time we met at the home of Dr. John Else and his wife, Kathy. John is actually the editorial consultant of the book. And having his energy involved in that process of refining the book and his experience in other publications was really terrific. It really kind of put us over the top, helped us to clear up our thoughts about it and organize it in a way that finally got it to a publishable form that I think excels compared to the first book we did. Amazing. And it's been deeply rewarding, if not painful.
Yeah, it's a lot to live through again, and writing is work. So I can understand on both levels. Now, Reverend Cook, you're still connected to El Salvador. You were just recently there.
Yes, I am. I do what's known as a legacy of light. When I was in El Tablon that first time, it was so dark when they blew out the candles and locked the door. I was scared. And I thought to myself, if I ever have the opportunity, I will bring solar electricity to these people. Well, 26 years later, the priest, Father Candido, contacted me and asked if I would be willing to install solar electricity in the homes of the poor farm families on that mountainside. And I'm doing that. And part of the royalties of the book go to the cost of solar electricity for all that mountainside, not just El Tablon. So yes, I'm still involved. I still go there. As I mentioned, I was there 2 months ago. I will be going again in November or January when I have enough money. All you people out there,
exactly.
I need more money.
Exactly. Let's sell more books.
Yeah.
So, Doug, have you been
One more name I must mention.
Yes.
Is Roxana Lucia Marmol Acevedo. She has a franchise on Mr. Chocolate Bananas. I gave her the initial money to form that company, and it's for real. She's doing the first franchise now.
Okay, great.
Mr. Chocolate Banana.
Mr. Chocolate Banana. Make sure to stop there for sure. Doug, have you made your way down to El Salvador yet?
Me?
Yes.
Yes. No, I haven't. I've been, Bob and I have talked about it before. I have been in transition over the last couple of years. My wife is a psychotherapist, mm-hmm. and she works with animals in her psychotherapy, primarily with children, but with people of all ages. We have 4 horses, 2 goats, a menagerie of dogs and cats, all of whom contribute to the process of her doing therapy, which is really astonishing. But we ended up buying this. This is too long a story. We bought a place. And so one of the things I've acquired over the years is a pretty good sense of being a handyman. And so I remodeled our barn to make it into a therapy center. And you know, we've worked on this old ranch house that we've been living in to make it more habitable. And all those things have just consumed a lot of time and energy and money. So I haven't made the trip to El Salvador. We will make that trip together someday. We will do that.
Exactly. Now, Reverend, do you ever see your adventures being made into a movie?
I'm sorry, what?
Have you ever visualized this book, Miracles in El Salvador, as a movie or a film?
Oh my gosh, that would be amazing.
Oh, I would love that to happen. Yes.
Yeah, he wants Bob wants to be played by who is it? Kevin Costner.
Kevin Costner. A young Kevin Costner.
But now I would rather it be Logan Crawford.
There you go. There you go. Okay. If you make the movie, I will absolutely sign up for the role. It'd be wonderful.
Okay.
You know, everybody wants to play a hero, Reverend, so I'd be happy to step up and play you without a doubt. Well, this has been a great conversation. The name of the book is called Miracles in El Salvador, A Minister's Journey for Justice and Hope. It is written, and there's the book right there. It is written by the Reverend Robert Cook and by Douglas Mabin. He's got a copy as well. They both keep it handy at all times. You're going to want to get a copy of this book as well. 1, proceeds go to help out a good cause, the Reverend's work in El Salvador. But 2, it's a fantastic journey that will renew your faith in God as you learn about a region that you probably only know very scant knowledge about. The name of the book, Miracles in El Salvador, A Minister's Journey for Justice and Hope. It's available on Amazon. Make sure to get it. Reverend Cook, thank you so much for joining us here today on Spotlight.
Thank you.
My pleasure. Doug Mabin, thank you for joining us as well.
Our deepest thanks for your time and energy and exposing the book to a wider public. We really appreciate it.
My pleasure. And to the viewers at home, I'm Logan Crawford, thanking you for your time this time. Until next time on Spotlight.